There's a place in Wyoming where tourists drive for hours to photograph a rock formation that looks exactly like a tree stump. Not vaguely, not if you squint, exactly. It has the columnar structure, the ring-like banding at the base, and a top that is flat and slightly concave, mirroring the precise way any stump looks after the wood has weathered away and only the mineralized core survives. The National Park Service calls it a volcanic plug, an igneous intrusion. They explain the hexagonal columns as the result of cooling lava contracting, which is true of basalt under specific conditions. What they do not explain is why it looks precisely, structurally, and undeniably like the stump of something that once grew there. Devil's Tower rises 837 feet from the Wyoming plains with no geological relatives nearby. No mountain range, no volcanic field, and no lava flows radiating outward in any direction. It simply stands there in total isolation, its base surrounded by a debris field of the same columnar material, as if something shattered and fell around it over an enormous span of time. Every other volcanic plug on this planet sits inside a volcanic system. This one does not. That anomaly has a standard explanation: erosion. They say the surrounding rock simply washed away over millions of years, exposing the harder core. It is a possible theory. Erosion is real, but it does not account for why the debris field around the base looks less like stone. It looks more like broken wood. In fact, the park rangers have a term for those fallen columns. They call them logs. This isn't a fringe idea. It is documented in geology papers and in the folklore of every indigenous culture that lived near it. The Lakota called it bear lodge, and their traditions describe it as something that grew, not something that erupted. You can choose to read that as metaphor, but the alternative reading is that the metaphor survived because it was accurate. If this was a living system, the height required to produce a stump this size is mathematically impossible by our current standards. But there is a number that circulates in the research community that changes everything: 40 miles. How could any organism reach 40 miles into the sky without collapsing under its own weight? 40 miles. That is the number that circulates in the research community that takes this hypothesis seriously. It is based on atmospheric pressure modeling and the structural requirements of what we would need to find to explain certain geological formations. These organisms are gone. The stumps remain. We call them mountains, we call them mesas, and we call them volcanic plugs. We have never seriously considered that they might be the compressed, petrified bases of a living system so large that our entire recorded history fits inside the gap between when it died and now. Before you dismiss that, follow the specific evidence, not the theory. In 1878, a survey team mapping the American Southwest documented a series of flat-top formations in Nevada and Utah. Their notes described the rock as having a fibrous interior structure, unlike any volcanic material in their geological reference library. One surveyor, a man named Clarence Dutton, who spent 12 years mapping the Colorado Plateau, wrote that certain canyon walls displayed a layering pattern that reminded him repeatedly and uncomfortably of cross-sectioned wood. He published this observation. It was noted by his contemporaries, and then it was quietly absorbed into the literature as a curiosity, explained away as pareidolia. Pareidolia is a real phenomenon. It explains why we see faces in clouds. It does not explain why trained geologists with decades of field experience independently note the same structural anomaly. Consider the Deccan Traps, the largest volcanic province on Earth, covering roughly 200,000 square miles of the Indian subcontinent. The standard model says a mantle plume erupted approximately 66 million years ago. The basalt flows are between 6,500 and 8,200 feet thick in places. That is not a mountain. That is a continent of compressed rock sitting on top of other rock. The dating of the layers shows something interesting. The lower layers are older, the upper layers are younger. Both explanations fit the data, but only one has ever been seriously funded. If the atmosphere supported flora of that scale, it leads us to a terrifying oxygen question. Current models attribute our ancient oxygen spike to 150-foot trees. But the math for a 35% oxygen atmosphere requires something significantly larger. What if the source of our life wasn't a forest at all, but a single, massive, interlocking hexagonal structure that spanned the entire globe? Current atmospheric oxygen sits at roughly 21%. But in the Carboniferous period 300 million years ago, it reached 35%. This was an era of giants. Insects grew to the size of eagles, and millipedes reached 8 feet in length. This happened because oxygen was abundant enough to support metabolisms we simply do not see on Earth today. Now, ask the question in reverse. What supported that atmosphere? Oxygen is produced by photosynthesis. The official explanation for this oxygen spike is vast coal swamp. Forests of plants reaching 150 feet. That math has always bothered atmospheric scientists who work on deep time-climate modeling. The numbers require either an implausibly dense global forest of 150-foot plants or a relatively sparse distribution of something significantly larger. Nobody publishes the second option because it breaks the current geological framework, but the evidence isn't in the air, it's in the stone. Consider the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland. 40,000 interlocking basalt columns, hexagonal, rising from the sea. The official explanation is a volcanic fissure eruption 50 to 60 million years ago. The lava cooled and contracted into columns. This is defensible, but here's the problem. The uniformity of diameter across 40,000 individual structures is biologically precise. Natural cooling basalt produces columns, but the consistency of these structures across 12-inch diameters is unusual. Even more unusual is that this same formation, the same hexagonal columns and structural characteristics, appears in Scotland, Iceland, Sicily, and Tasmania. Are these mere geological coincidences, or remnants of a prehistoric world we are only beginning to understand? The truth may be written in the very foundations of the Earth. There is a term in material science for what happens when organic matter is compressed and mineralized over geological time: permineralization. Under a microscope, permineralized biological material retains the structural memory of what it was before. We accept that a log can turn to stone. We do not accept that a 40-mile structure could do the same. But scale has nothing to do with chemistry. If these are the mineralized cells of a global living system, it would explain the oxygen spike that the swamp theory cannot. But it leaves us with a darker implication. If these mountains were alive, why did they all stop growing at the same geological moment? And what does the Shiprock formation in New Mexico reveal about a root system that magma can never explain? Permineralization is a process that doesn't care about our human perception of scale. It only cares about chemistry. It occurs when silica or calcium carbonate slowly replaces original biological material, preserving the cellular structure while turning the object into stone. We find petrified logs everywhere. We have entire forests of them. We accept that wood can turn to stone, but we refuse to accept that a structure 40 miles tall could do the same, simply because we cannot imagine anything of that magnitude ever existing. However, the chemistry is identical. The Stump hypothesis researchers point to a cluster of anomalous characteristics shared by these mountains: flat or concave tops, circular bases, and an internal columnar structure rather than the layered stratigraphy typical of volcanic formations. Each individual anomaly has an official explanation, but when you take them together as a category, a different pattern emerges. Not proof pattern. Proof would require a sample, a preserved section of the original organism, or a molecular analysis that confirms biological origin. That analysis has never been done, not because the technology doesn't exist, but because no research institution has funded it. Science, like any human institution, has categories, and what falls outside those categories does not get investigated. It gets labeled. And the label sits on a plaque next to a hiking trail while the thing it describes keeps standing there, waiting. Consider the Tepuis of Venezuela, sandstone table mountains rising thousands of feet from the jungle floor. The official age of the rock is billions of years, but the current surface structure is far younger. Each tepui is roughly circular, with a vertical wall that transitions sharply to a flat top. This is exactly what a cross-section of a mineralized root system would look like relative to the surrounding soil. But the most disturbing evidence is in New Mexico, at a site called Shiprock. It is a 1,500-foot volcanic plug, accompanied by 3 radial dikes extending from its base. The official explanation for these dikes is magma hardening in cracks. But there is a directional flaw. The dikes run downward. Magma doesn't flow downward through horizontal cracks. Roots do. If these are roots, then the mountain we see is just the beginning. What was this system connected to? What happened to the frequency reset that turned the very air into a poison for the giants? Shiprock rises 1,583 feet from a flat New Mexican plain. Its 3 radial dikes are its most famous feature. In standard geology, these are magma flows that hardened in place. But look at the angle. Magma flowing from a central source spreads radially at the same elevation. These dikes run downward into the earth. That is a biological trait, not a volcanic one. It mimics the structural anchor of a massive root system. It was designed to hold a weight that transcends our modern physics. We are tracing the outline of a reality that was deleted. Beethoven's tuning fork vibrates at 455 hertz in a glass case in the British Library. Every piano in the world today is tuned to a standard he never used. The bells that once held those different frequencies were melted into cannons during the Great Transitions. The buildings designed to resonate with those bells still stand. The stone still carries the architecture, but nothing feeds it anymore. The trees, if they existed, are gone. The stumps remain. We have inherited their ruins and call them our achievements. We walk through their libraries and call the high shelves a design choice. We look at their tools and call them ceremonial. We are the descendants of a reset, heirs to a diminished kingdom. The tragedy is that we have been taught to be proud of our smallness. We have been taught that the history of the world was one of struggle, when the physical evidence suggests it was once an era of monumental capacity. The 16-foot saws and the rotting sheds and the 9-foot plows buried in the dirt of the Midwest are not props. They are the last physical anchors to the reality that existed before the world was made too loud and too sharp for the giants to survive. The 1890 census was the final audit of the old world. When it was destroyed, the high people were removed from the ledger of the living and placed in the ledger of the mythological. Every photograph that showed them integrated into the workforce was removed. Every doorway that was too high was bricked over. Giants lived here. The world was scaled down with surgical precision. But as long as the stone still holds the frequency of the old resonance, the reset is not complete. The truth is, waiting for someone willing to read the world as it was built, rather than as we've been told it must be. We are the ones who are out of proportion. We are the ones who are out of tune. And the giants are not gone. They are simply waiting for us to remember their height. The legacy of this investigation is a call to measure your surroundings. Look at the handle heights. Look at the column diameters. Realize that you're standing on the tiptoes of a ghost civilization. The evidence is not hidden in secret vaults. It is the environment itself. The cathedrals, the star forts, and the municipal buildings are the physical fossils of a different humanity. We inhabit them today, pretending we are the original architects, never asking why the handle is so high or why the ceiling is so far away. The silence of the last century was the sound of a machine that successfully replaced a soul. But the record is still there. The giants didn't go into the ground, they went into the silence. And the silence is finally starting to break. Giants walked here?